I'm Michael Strong, and I'm the host of When School's Not Working, along with my illustrious co-host, Kath Fraze, and Matt Barnes, who's not with us this evening. He's got other stuff going on. We have Demetria Menard, and she is an amazing homeschooling mom, and we're going to learn about her. But first, I'm going to say that I am the founder of Expanse, a online program where we help you discover and develop your child's genius. Kathy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes, I'm Catherine Fraze. I'm the founder of Workspace Education and a research and development company called 100 Roads, and we reimagine how education can be. And right now we're doing virtual online learning campuses. So that's what I'm embroiled in, but I'm super excited to have Dee on board today. And we got to catch up a little bit earlier, and she's got an amazing story. 5 gorgeous children ranging from 7 all the way up through 25. So she, it's amazing that she has 5 children. I only have a few friends in that category right now. And that she's chosen to homeschool them is also really, a brave and amazing decision. And I'm so excited to hear about how she's managed to do that, as well as run a business, a very interesting tech business. And she's got so much experience and great stories. So I'm excited to get started and help you understand where she's coming from.
No, I totally agree. Thank you. And Dee, usually I blame it on Matt. Matt describes those of us who don't do regular education as weirdos. So he's not here. I can really blame it on him. We always like to start with the origin story. How did you decide to be one of us weirdos?
So, yeah, I was thinking about that after talking earlier, and I'm super old, I guess, but about 22 years ago, when my 25-year-old was between 2 and 3, we started at a Montessori school. I love Montessori, so I was really sold on using the Montessori method, especially with younger kids. Anyways, long story short, I dropped him off the first day and cried for hours. And so did he. Dropped him off the second day and cried for more hours. And by the end of the first week, the principal was like, you can't drop him off anymore because it's not working and he needs to be away from you, right? And so my husband at the time, ex-husband now, started dropping him off, and we did it for like 3 weeks, and it just did not work. I never stopped crying. He never stopped crying. And I started questioning why it's so important to separate a kid from their parent. That was really the beginning. Okay, so that's part one. Now let's follow this up a couple of years later. We're older, thinking, okay, we can do this again. And kindergarten age, you put your kid in school. And the first thing that popped into my head for my child is Black History Month. Which is a funny thing, but I hate Black History Month. Partially growing up in Texas, being, one of 3 Black people in a classroom, really what happens when you teach Black history? A lot of times what happens is the teacher goes, Black people, well, they were slaves. And then all of your classmates look at you and go, oh, that's you. Okay, and so I thought, there's no way my kid is having this experience. Sorry. I don't want him thinking in terms of who is greater than the other person. I don't want him thinking in terms of slavery. I want him to have 100% control of who he is and how he is, right? And so I was still a little bit, there's the whole, as a parent, how much time should you spend with your child, right? So there's a lot of the naysayers who are like, okay, well, she's clearly too attached to this child, right? He needs space from her. So anyways, we started our homeschooling journey way back when, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And right along this time, I started to divorce my first husband, who he dove in. The only thing that he really had going in the divorce for him against me as a parent was the fact that I homeschooled. And at this point, I actually had started unschooling, which is the next step, where I fully believe that kids can learn if you leave them alone. Give them an environment, support what they want to know about, and all of a sudden you have someone who's a voracious reader, learner, whatever, right? So I was pretty, looking back, it was probably not smart to say I'm unschooling. did. And so then we had a problem, and my attorney at the time was like, you have to sell it, right? This judge is going to make you put your child in school if you.
She freeze for you, Kath?
She did.
And
yes.
the more did I leave? Am I still here?
No, you're frozen just for a moment there, but keep going.
Okay.
This is a great story.
So the more research I did, the more I was convinced that unschooling was the way to go. There's a lot of data out there, and the fact of the matter is schools don't really work. And for Black kids, schools really don't work. So by the time I was done convincing the judge that I was going to, and I was very adamant, I was going to unschool, not homeschool. I was not going to provide a curriculum, but I was going to provide a plan, right? I know what I want to do for my child. And I know, a little bit of what is expected of me. And so with that in mind, and with the idea that I was going to have to keep fighting for the right to unschool, I just kind of, started. And I gave the judge, I guess, enough information because he was like, okay, she's totally going to do it. And I totally sided with me. It's really funny, in my divorce decree, he even said, I am in charge of all education, right? Which is like the next step, right? It wasn't just, hey, she can make the choices, but all of the education choices for that. So I did nothing. So what did I do from there? I was like, wow, freedom, nothing, right? What you're going to get is tons of love. But, honestly, we spent, when my 25-year-old was the only child, we spent, he would say something like, I want to know about dinosaurs. And so we would spend 2 weeks at a museum learning about dinosaurs, right? And really a lot of what he was interested in, he loved all things nonfiction at the time. So tons of times at zoos, really when he started learning to read, all of these things that just, we were just super active in following what he wanted to do. So then 8 years later, I'm remarried now. And now my second kid is coming along, and I feel like I know what I'm doing, right? I feel like, okay, I have 8 years, I got this, got it. I have a daughter, and my daughter is driven. She is this child who, I'm pretty sure she was reading at age 3. She was writing, not writing a little bit, but she would write poetry at like 3. It was crazy. I was like, okay, this is odd. Is this because of homeschooling or unschooling? Because no one ever told her you can't. No one ever, I never gave her a pencil, really, right? If she said, I'd like a pencil, right? Pencils were everywhere, so it's paper, right? And we did spend tons of time doing and seeing, and we were in Austin at the time, and there's a homeschooling group, Austin area homeschoolers, and it was just kind of wonderful, really. It was a very diverse group of people who were educating their children in different ways. There was homeschoolers, there was unschoolers, there was Montessori, there was Waldorf, everyone getting together once or twice a week. It was not a co-op, so there was no one teaching classes. It was literally kids coming together to play. Interesting thing about that, when kids get together to play, whatever they are doing becomes part of the play, right? And so if you have a child who, my 8-year-old right now loves all things astrology. He wants to know everything about other planets, everything, right? And so we were at the park the other day, and he's talking to random 6-year-old, and he's explaining to them how the universe is created, right? So all of a sudden they can play a game about comets, because that's how kids learn, right? If you give them the environment, it doesn't matter what they're doing, they are going to share, and somehow it's going to be part of their game. That's just, a current example of a thing that just keeps happening. I'm like, what? Like when I first started, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to trust. I'm going to do some research so there's a 25-year-old, and I have the next two, which are 15 and 17. With them, when they were like little, we would do things like sing the ABC song, that sort of thing, right? Because you think this is how you educate your child, especially at young ages. So by the time I had my now 6-year-old and 8-year-old, I abandoned the ABC song. I'm like, why are we singing this song? It's so dumb. And yet by the age of 2, they all knew their ABCs. It's, it's one of those things where I really and truly think that the job of a parent is to get out of the way, provide the environment, get out of the way, because I don't think that I could have ever imagined. I mean, like, and I often think about my kids and think, okay, high IQ family. So of course they're going to do things like study the stars at at young ages. But I've been doing this for 20, I have a 25-year-old, so it's 23 years. And my kids are not exceptional. This is the really cool thing is I've met so many people and we've traveled so much. And so not just in one part of the country, but really lots of different people. And all of the kids are amazing, right? Like not one, not two, and everyone has a different story, right? My kid really loved to dance. So now she is this great dancer. I remember we were in Chicago for a while and there was teenagers. And so there was a girl and a boy and they started dating and everyone was like, okay, they're kind of young for dating. What's going to happen to these kids? How are they going to turn out? One of them is a vet now. I mean, like never stopped. She fell in love with this guy and they were kind of young. They got married. He's a fireman and she's a vet. They never stopped. And they were unschooled kids because both of them had a passion, right? They said, oh, I'm interested in this thing, whatever the thing is. And the parents helped them follow through, right? You don't go from, you don't go, people wonder what happens to my homeschooler. Like when my kids are 25, and I'm probably droning on and I apologize, but I just love it so much, right? Like, I have a friend whose daughter is, after she traveled the world, which she was a nanny. She was like, okay, I'm done being home. I'm going to become a nanny. And she did. And she just traveled the world with a family. And then she was like, okay, I'm done with that. And went to school and then became a yoga instructor. And now she owns her own studio in Chicago, right? Like I have so many stories like that where I have another friend, this is a really good one, unschooled kid who didn't go to school at all. And then parents got a divorce. And so mom was like, what am I going to do with my kid? And she's like, okay, well, I guess the youngest 2 are going to go to high school. So her child goes to high school, becomes an international math champion, the daughter, like in a year. She went from nothing. She was like, okay, well, are we going to compete? I really like math. And she's like one of the best in the country. She traveled all around the world doing math competitions and now she's an accountant. And that's with 100%, her parent was like, well, we've been homeschooling and let's see where she is. She loves numbers. So she always had access to this, education, but it was not planned. It was not a curriculum. It was not first you learn this and then you learn this. It was, we are going to do the things that you need to get to where you want to go. And so that is a lot of me talking, but
the judge story is kind of amazing. I want to hear about, you were relatively early in this world, especially the unschooling world. What kind of stigma was there? Family stigma? Did you have to push back? Who did you have to push back against and how? What was that like?
There was so much flack when we first started. Thinking about my first kid who I remember when he was 8 years old, my mom called me and was like, so-and-so told me that Daniel can't read. And of course it wasn't true. He could read just fine, right? But because he had never taken a test, there was, how do you know he can read, right? How do you know he could do this? Or how do you know he could do that? And honestly, I'm still a little bit cautious with my children and talking about who and how I educate them. It's really funny. Most people, when they meet my kids, they say, wow, these are super articulate, smart kids, right? And it's only after they look at me and say, how did you get such awesome kids, that we talk about unschooling. And yes, flack the entire way, especially from the grandparents who are like, why are you doing this to your poor children? They're not going to understand. So the biggest thing that people question is, how are they going to learn to complete anything really, right? How are they going to learn follow through, or how are they going to learn drive? if you don't teach them that they must get things done on a certain schedule. And again, I have only seen, we've traveled a lot. And so I have a good set of kids that I pull from, not just my own when I talk about this, but they all have drive. Everyone has drive. Turns out, leave someone alone and say, in order to get to C, you have to complete A and B. And, that's not true for all things in life, but my 25-year-old who has a computer science degree really wanted to be a game programmer. And in order to be a game programmer, there are steps that you have to take, period, right? He didn't start taking the steps until he was 18, but the moment he understood, the moment he engaged in what has to happen, he did it. Right. But then there's examples of that all along the way. My 8-year-old loves to cook. Well, you can't cook until you can read a recipe or you can turn on the stove. There are steps for everything in life. And if the kid is following their passion, they find them. So anyways, I was answering a question about Slack, and yes, we get that often. We also get well, why aren't your kids in school? Okay. And so along with this, we should talk about the color of my skin. Because one of the things that I think happens a lot is they see a Black woman with all of her children, and I have a lot of kids. So in a lot of ways, people immediately categorize me as a person who isn't, can't educate, right? Isn't qualified. And then I'm out in the middle of the day, and then all of a sudden you have the set of people who really question me and my kids and why I'm doing this, and even if it's legal. And I feel like I'm kind of at an extreme for the unschooling world, right? So when people ask me, my kids, what grade are they in? A lot of times they're like, I have no idea, because we don't keep track of that, right? But after all of the questions, and so the other really funny thing that's related to this is when my oldest was a kid, when he was little, I spent a lot of time thinking of answers and trying to make sure that they knew that I was qualified and that my kids knew something, right? Making sure they could read or that sort of thing. And I'm kind of angry about it now. And so I am less willing to engage in the conversation, period. It's not, I don't feel like it's any other person's responsibility or business to ask me about how I'm raising my kids, especially I get it. If a kid is in a place destroying it, then okay, that makes sense that you would question, hey, why is your kid destroying this? But if an adult walks into a building, no one says to the adult, why are you here? So why is it okay in our society for them to do that to an adult who's walking in with a kid? Is my attitude towards that now. And so now I'm like, well, call the cops. Like, do it makes you happy. But at the end of the day, the person who's asking is going to be embarrassed. For the grandparents, I've gotten to where I'm like, okay, how much have you read about education? How about unschooling? After you've read all of these things, then ask me questions, but not before. Right? Play the catch-up game. And if you can't, then we don't have anything to discuss.
I would say that at this point, it must be like proof is in the pudding.
You would think so, but no. You would really think so. And there's so many unschoolers out there now too. But here's the thing. Everyone is looking for the example of failure. Everyone is. I don't know why that's such a part of our society, but everyone's kind of holding their breath. They're waiting. And I guess some of it may be how you define failure. What does failure look like to the person who's raising the kids, right? And my definition, for me, failure is a child who feels not supported. It is not a child who doesn't go to college, right? For me, it's, the mental health issues that come from school. That's failure. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like failure comes from the methods that you choose to educate your kids.
I think I've heard you mention David Deutsch. It sounds like you decided to do this before reading Deutsch. Was he?
I did.
So
yeah.
Say about kind of was he an influence or not, and in what way, if he was?
So I don't know.
Nobody knows. I didn't introduce him. So just give us that little.
Okay. Well, I don't. So I want to talk about really. Okay, let's talk about my influences. Okay, Deutsch is not one of them. I love Montessori. I love Montessori a lot, and a lot of people know Montessori because she. Okay, so I think that there are several issues that she interacts with that Deutsch doesn't. One of them being the idea that when people talk about best ways for kids to get information, what is that? And she worked a lot inside of cities and inner cities, and she really did a great job of demonstrating how environment is not as important as engagement, right? And so I think that, so I think she's super important. And along the way, I've taken bits and pieces of different ideas. For a bit, I loved Waldorf. Waldorf has freedom, right? But at some point, all of these ideas start to focus too much, in my opinion, on education and not enough on I'm going to call it mental health. Okay, so one of the things that I've realized in the last 6 months, and I'm going to come back to your question, Michael, but is how uninterested I am in questions about education. So it's really funny. I love education. I think that it is very important, but I think that if you are a very educated person who doesn't have control over your being or your mental health, then one thing kind of eliminates the others, right? It's the story of geniuses who are not functional, right? Or they're alcoholics or they're drug addicts because they have all of these other competing things going on inside of their brain. So, okay, so Holt, everybody likes John Holt. I love John Holt because I think that part of what he does is appreciate the entire person as opposed to one part of the person. I really like, I have to think of the name. I'm forgetting the name. I'll come back. I'll come back to it. So anyways, my point only is that all of the different theories of education, I'm trying to find good words. All of the different theories of education, I think, are really great if what you are working on is education. But I think most people who are in education figure out that instead of focusing on how much a person knows, you should focus on the whole person, right? So anyways, so when I'm talking about ways to educate your child, I generally talk about, so there's two, I think, really good books that have come out in the last 50 years. One of them is, oh man, my brain is stopping, but one of them is about really trying to understand the emotional makeup of your child, or really any person, and how to communicate through the emotional parts of interacting and communication. And when I think of the name, I'll come back to it, or there's like 6 things now to come back to, but and the other one is about how to there's a person who wrote a book that's called Handwriting Without Tears, and I don't remember the name of the book, and I really don't remember much about it other than the idea being that if your child learns to have beautiful handwriting but hates handwriting, then it's not a trade-off. But the idea being that if you learn to communicate with your child, there's a guy who's called Ross Green. He is a PhD. He wrote a book that's called Raising Humans, where he talks about, at the end of the day, really why education doesn't work is because we are focusing on education and how many facts we put into a child's head and how they turn out in the end is not part of what we are doing. And so we are leaving bits and pieces of kids behind. People, they start off as whole people, So by the time they get through the system, because we are so focused on how much, and the really funny thing is, at the end of the day, most schools, we're really focused on how much they know. And at the end, the numbers are bad. They don't know much. Like if you think about how much kids read when they come out of, so like we're super focused, but we're failing. And the reason that we're failing is because we're breaking our kids. That's what school is doing. I was in a presentation the other day where someone, the person was presenting, and they were presenting all these numbers about our education system and how really they were talking about the discipline part of the education system and how just atrocious it really is, right? And for most kids with mental health issues, by the age of 6, and really funny, this guy, he talks about kids and he says there's 2 kinds of kids, lucky kids and unlucky kids. And he said, and he's a PhD, so he's got lots of experience in studying this. Lucky kids are the kids who are unhappy with the system, but they learn to use the words so that they get through while hating it. Unlucky kids are the kids who are not very good at figuring out how to game the system. And so they are honest about their emotions, or they throw fit. And either way, what happens is these unlucky kids who are just as capable as lucky kids, they get the shit. Really, they just have this horrible experience, right? And it just gets worse, and it builds. If you start as an unlucky kid in kindergarten, you probably don't graduate high school because they just start stacking and stacking and stacking the negative things. So we all talk about that. We know that. Mm-hmm. So then he talks about the lucky kids. Mm-hmm. And he's like, okay, these are awesome kids, right? They're the valedictorians. They figure out how to game the system. And so they just keep seemingly getting better and better and better. But what are they learning? I mean, if you look at the mental health in the country, turns out what they're learning is that they don't matter. Right? What they're learning is, in order to get ahead, they have to leave behind all the things that they actually care about. And they don't get to voice their opinion, right? And so then you end up with all of the kids are the unlucky kids, if you look at it from that point of view, right? That was me totally going on a tangent. Sorry.
No, we totally agree. We talk about these issues a lot. So I'm actually now curious. You mentioned the Black History Month as being one of the reasons you pulled your child out of school. You've talked about unlucky and lucky, and I'd love to hear more. To what extent do you think the system is especially harmful for Black kids? And maybe it's not. But
oh no, it is.
I was kind of giving you a softball there. Go ahead and hit it out of the ballpark.
I would not put my Black children and my mixed race children in a school. So I was talking to Catherine earlier, and I was telling her last week, we went to the park with the kids, and I met this, what I described it as is the most verbal miscreants I've ever met. Because they were like teenagers. I was like walking towards the park and going, okay, well, this is going to be trouble. But they were super talkative, and they were talking about their experiences in school in Colorado. And I don't live in a very multicultural area, right? Pretty much white. So one of the kids was Hispanic. And so we were talking about his experiences in school, and they are horrible. They are horrible, right? And they are absolutely based on race. He is more likely to get in trouble. His teachers are more likely to give him. So this is a child who's a straight A student. And then COVID happened. And this is a rant. So thank you, Michael, for getting me started. But this kid, COVID started. So school is now mostly online. He is not a wealthy person, so his internet's bad. And so he would try to log on to school, and he couldn't. Okay, what could be done about that, right? So the school is in a wealthy area. So they're like, if you can't log on, we're going to start deducting from your grade. So this straight A student went to a D student. And if you ask me, that is discrimination at the worst, right? Like, So if he, and the only reason he passed to the next grade is because all of his work was good. So he's an excellent student. And that saved his butt, but didn't get him an A, and will affect him for the rest of his life because his internet wasn't Wi-Fi high speed. And that is the system, period, right? And it doesn't matter. Like, I have so many, like, even so, yeah, even inside of, I don't think there's a community that exists. I have another friend who he has a friend who teaches at a school in California, wealthy school district, and none of her students are white. All of her students are Hispanic because all of the white students go to private school, right? And so does the quality of education change? Absolutely. And here's the thing, she's like, all of my students are this color. A lot of hers are Hispanic, and I love my students, but every bit of bias that she has, she's still using for those students, whether she sees it or not. And she's communicating that to her students. Is the system rigged? I don't know that I'd say it's rigged, but I certainly don't want my Black child there, because I mean, and Black History Month is a beautiful example. If you're in a school and you're the only Black kid and you are the only Black person in class, and what they're talking about is and here's the really funny thing, even if you're a Black kid, that doesn't mean you were ever a slave or that your ancestors weren't. They just assume that because of the color of your skin. Because if you're an immigrant, if you're an even second generation immigrant at this point, you could have the color, you could have brown skin and never have met a slave in your life. But in that classroom, in that moment, so what about, there's a whole set of things that are around that, not to mention Black boys especially, they're more likely to go to jail, they're more likely to get kicked out of school. When Daniel was, this is in the homeschooling environment, we did a Lego competition, and Daniel was upset because his teammates didn't build the robot right. Something, it was so minor, and he said something, and the teacher was offended that he spoke up, not because he spoke up inappropriately, but because it wasn't okay for him to speak up because he was a Black child, right? That sort of thing. Yeah, I think it happens all the time. I think it happens in school. And I don't think that it's based on, like, I think that you could have a teacher who is a Black teacher teaching Black students who still has the same set of biases, right? And that affects kids. The first thing that there's so many, I mean, even women, right? If I'm a girl, 50 years ago, there were so many things that they said that women could not do. And so in school, they're like, hey, you're not going to do that. I was a programmer. I was, when I was 15, I was the only programmer in my class. And I was also the only girl in my class, right? And I was absolutely the only Black person in my class. And so everyone's like, oh, this is great. Black people can do it too. Thinking that's great, but that's super negative actually, right? Because I am not exceptional. That's the thing, right? I am a human, just like the other person's a human. And one of the things that I don't want my kids to experience, even though they will, because the society that we live in, they're never going to get away from it, but I'm not going to put them in it on purpose. And I'm certainly not going to be the angry Black mother, because that's what happens, right? Like after about the 30th time of them calling your kid, and I'm not the only person who's saying this sort of thing. There's enough research on it now that it actually happens. If you're a Black child, you are way more likely to get turned in for not completing homework than you are if you are a white kid or Asian kid. It's just, so yeah, I would not put my kid in school because I don't want them to have that. I want them to have the exact same set of, I'm going to call it self-respect that anybody else would. And if you start teaching them that they are less than the next person at age 5, then sorry, it just doesn't work for me.
So I can imagine, there are all these, policy wonks out there and all these people writing these articles, and I can imagine them thinking, okay, we need to get more Black people in tech, and we need to raise test scores and yada, yada, yada. And then they hear you and you saying, no, all families, including all Black families, just pull your kids out of school. I'm kind of playing with it, but how, given their mindset, what is your message to all these, well-intentioned people who want to try to change things?
That's a hard one. I mean, it's really mostly just get out of the way. Just like, I have the same thing I say about my children, right? Just get out of the way. Stop putting barriers up. This is me picking on California, but California's gas price right now is something like $7. I'm like, are you serious, guys? So basically, you hate poor people because you're never going to get out of poverty if it costs you more than you make to go to your job. I feel the same way about education. Like, get out of the way. Don't say to a kid, especially, I'm a minority kid. I have access to internet for 5 hours a day, and the best education that I'm going to get is Expanse, right? But now all of the data says don't use the internet, right? And so the really funny thing is, for all of those sets of information, there's the counter argument, right? Where, we have lots of good numbers now, and no one is saying that anyone lost, no one got dumber. All of the kids who had access to the internet during COVID, they did just fine. All of the kids who had limited access, not so good, right? Get out of the way. Let the kids do what they need to do and stop putting barriers up to prevent them. It's my, we try to fix it by adding new rules, and that doesn't work.
So for all those do-gooder policy people, your recommendation is shut down all the schools and give everybody great internet access and a laptop?
No. For all of the people so 2 or 3 things. First, educate the parents, right? I don't mean educate the parents as in all parents have to be college graduates in order to educate their kids. I mean, educate the parents on what is possible, right? That is the thing. Hey, did you know that most libraries are free for you to use the internet for X amount of time? Did you know that there is free public transportation to get from here to there? Did you know that these people offer free classes on these days of the week? Give the parents the information, and then let them decide where they're going to take their kids and when they're going to take their kids, right? That is the key. And my other thing is, stop taking the parents away. Like, one of the things that a lot of people, the solution to the problem is the parents have all of these issues. So if we just remove the kids from the parents, put them in school longer, yada, 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 then that's going to solve the problem. But you know what? It doesn't, because the kids still go home, right? Help the parents. Stop ignoring the parents. Include them in your process, right? Because by helping the parents, you help the kids. How about that one?
I agree with you, Dee. I feel like that a parent can have a huge influence over their child. So that's where you can really make a difference. If you can help support them being really great coaches, I think Matt would agree, then, they didn't get a degree on how to look after their children and their teens, right? So they're very, very open to these suggestions. We just need to teach them how to fish if they want to. And then, of course, they can always have the school to fall back on if it doesn't work.
A lot of places where they have schools as a resource, and people are not aware of that either, where you can have your kid and educate them, and then use the teachers as somewhat of a tutor, right? So the places where you think but the other thing is, trust your child, right? Because there's this set of people who the first year or 2 out of school, always it's the same, and that is, no one knows what to do. You have all of these years of someone telling you every hour of your day, what you're supposed to be doing. So when you remove that, there's a period of time that is the scary part, where you're like, oh no, we just did this thing, and now my kid is sitting around all day. He's doing nothing, right? He doesn't know what to do with his time. So there's also that, where I think that there is the, if you don't know, that's what support groups are for, I should say. That's the other thing, is like, what you really want is a set of people who give you grace and space to grow. That's it, right? And we're not all going to do it the same way, and we're not all going to agree, and that's fine. I think the part that's important is giving the child the opportunity, but I just don't think they're going to get in school.
So I'm trying to think of ways. I have the voice of the policy skeptic in my head, and not just the policy skeptic, the parent who believes in the authorities and all of that, and most parents do. And one thing you said that I think might be something that more people could get is, I might mangle your language a little bit, but something like at 5, not being respected, not being loved, maybe being shamed and humiliated, and like that every day for the next 18 years. And then the cumulative negative impact that has. And then when you go back to trust your kid, what I'm thinking is, if more parents could have the kind of, it's going to sound strange, but love for their kids. Obviously, all parents love their kids, but you and a couple of other parents we've spoken to take that love for their child and realize how damaging the system is. And so I'm trying to figure out is how to help parents take seriously, if the child gets these negative emotional messages from the environment, that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Have you had success, as it were, converting parents from the establishment to something like your perspective?
I am not into conversion theory. So I don't even attempt. I feel like we all are raising our kids. So I'm going to go back to something else you said, because you were talking about parents being accepting of or not maybe even realizing the damage the system is doing. And when I was talking earlier, one of the things is we all grew up in the system. So it is super hard to detach your emotional state from the system enough to be able to, to not accept it as just the way it is, right? There's a certain amount of being brave that you have to, in order to get to a place where you don't believe that the authorities are always right. It doesn't matter how many numbers you throw out, but hey, there's some really good numbers, right? If you look at how homeschoolers perform over time versus people who are educated in the public school system, the homeschooling numbers are so good, and they get better every year, right? And even though people know these numbers, they still don't take their kids out. They're still afraid. It's because we all grew up in the system. And I think what makes me different from the person who leaves their kid in, I was going to say I'm brave, but part of it is I'm stupid because I'm like the person who says to me, "You can't," I don't accept that, right? Don't tell me what I can't, because for everything that has ever been done, ever actually, right? Humans get better because of the people who say, "Okay, I can." Or, everyone around me is saying that the earth is flat, the earth is round, right? It's only after you learn to trust yourself. And that's kind of pulling, away from the system. And, all of the people who, I should say many of the people who I know, it's not like every third year I don't say, "Oh my God, my kid isn't doing this thing." It's not like I don't have that fear, right? It is just, instead of having the fear stop me, right? Fear is great. It's telling me something, right? But I am not going to take that fear and make it, make it my own jail, right? You have a choice. You can be afraid and so stop, or you can be afraid and you can keep going. And it's only after you keep going that you see the cool stuff, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's fabulous. Kath, did you have something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to agree, like, I come across a lot of parents that are like, I have to work. I really, really need 2 incomes. And I think sometimes they even, obviously it's not easy to live now, and people do need 2 incomes in a lot of cases. But I think that during COVID, it's become pretty normal to work at home and to have different ways that you can actually, work from home a couple of days, or, share the homeschooling responsibilities or unschooling responsibilities with your partner, if you're lucky to have a partner. But there's just more ways that you can think out of the box to make it work for everyone. And also understand that, when a child is working in their lane, like working on things that they love, it's completely different atmosphere in the house. It's not like you are sitting there with the homework and you're like trying to get them to finish their homework, and then the busy work that's been, given by a teacher, and the child's not really interested in the homework. It's not like that when you're homeschooling and your child is engaged and doing things that they're passionate about. And in fact, one of the best things I discovered about homeschooling myself was how beautiful it is in your family when all your energy is going to kind of the center of your family, and you're not beholden by the school's calendar and schedule. Like the school stops becoming your whole life, and you can really focus on making the rituals and the kind of family environment that you want, and really listen to each other so that everyone in your family can be successful. And that was, that was a huge discovery for me, because I wasn't at the mercy of outsiders. I could really focus in on what was the most important thing in my life. And it's a real gift to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking of inside of that is the people who, there are a lot of people who they're swayed by the opinions of others. So there's freedom from that too, right? Because all of a sudden you have less input. You have less people telling you the things that you are doing wrong. You can like focus in, and a lot of times people they are commenting on things that they don't really know, right? You have this inside view of your kid when the kid is around you. And there's also the support group. I'm very big on support groups. If you're a single mom, yeah, you have to go to work. And some people don't have a choice, but that's what support groups are for. Because I've met so many moms who are homeschooling other people's kids also, right? They're like, hey, mom had to go to work today, so I have all of the kids. And they're everywhere. They're all over the country. And my other thing is, I love homeschooling. Like, it's absolutely the right thing for me and my family, not the right thing for everyone. And I can acknowledge that, right? But here's the thing. The choices are not homeschool or public school, right? There's so many choices in the middle that most people just aren't aware of. And so I think that's another thing to consider is, maybe your option is not going to be homeschool, but there are online programs, there are free programs, there's charter schools, there's all sorts of things, and lots of charter schools have scholarship programs. Part of I think the idea is to do the right thing for your child and to listen to your child, because a lot of times they know. So
you mentioned Austin. I do think of Austin as one of the, and support groups, Austin has one of the richest homeschooling communities, I think, in the US. I know you've moved around all over the place. You say there are resources everywhere. Would you say that there's a big difference place to place? How hard, where are some places it's harder and where are some places it's easier?
I've tapped into homeschooling pretty much. If there's a big city in the country, I've tapped into the homeschoolers, and they're always big communities, and they're huge, and they're supportive. And so I would honestly, I'm in Colorado now, and it's the hardest one that I found so far, because there's a lot of discrimination, a lot of Christian homeschoolers who are not accepting of people who are not very specific types of Christians. And so, but other than Colorado, which even with, I say it's more difficult because it took us longer to find a group of homeschoolers who were not just very, what is the word? But, extreme, right? Extremely Christian. Other than Colorado, and in that specific case, I really have been everywhere. Georgia is awesome because in Georgia, you can homeschool other people's kids legally. And so there's a lot of, there's groups, but then there's also like one-room schoolhouses with one mom and 6 kids, right? Those are awesome. I love California. I've been in lots of different cities in California. California has the one really big group, I think it's called Homeschooling Association of Southern California, but it turns out they're the whole state. They're through so if you tap into them, then there's lots. I love Chicago. Chicago has 2 really big homeschooling groups. Like I said, I've been everywhere. And New York has a really good one too. It really is about finding the 1 or 2 people. And then they're like, oh, you're in that group. Well, that's a small group, but the big group is over here. And the big group usually has thousands of people. And from the big group, there's other smaller groups. And so that's how you find the people. And really the choices, right? Because California, I'm thinking of, where you will meet a homeschooler who's like, yeah, my kid is at this charter school, and this charter school does this specific type of education, this many days of the week. Here's the teacher that you should pick because she does this, or the other, right?
Yeah, and they're a very, very, very large Facebook group with pretty much every curriculum option
that you can imagine
available. Yeah, so you can just go in there and write about your child. and you'll probably end up with about 50 to 70 comments and suggestions. And it will give you a fantastic list of what to start with, and then you can do your research from there. And then if you have any further questions, you can just refine it. And that will be the most up-to-date information. I mean, you don't need a fancy educational consultant or anything like that.
No, it's free.
You really don't. Yeah, it's free and it's available. And people really love to share about experiences that they've had with different curriculum if you decide to go that way, or if your child has an interesting and hard to find hobby. I can guarantee you'll find other kids out there who also have that. And before you know it, your child's in an anime club, and
That's true.
they're painting the flowers with watercolors over here, and they're growing orchids. Like there's a whole world out there that's extremely accessible and usually free. So it's really limited by how willing you are to go in and explore a bit.
I agree. And I don't know a state that is not true of. I mean, in Clubhouse, there's a group that I can't remember the name of them. Maybe it's World Schooling. And the person who runs that one, she can tell you about all the homeschooling groups throughout the world. And that's quite a big group also. So I don't know how big your Facebook group is, or if they're just all in the United States, but there's a pretty big international group of homeschoolers, and then every state has different laws. But let me tell you, get on Facebook with the right set of homeschooling moms, and they will tell you every law and every loophole that is out there.
Yeah, how they work around everything. It is quite a club.
Right.
And when I first started, homeschooling, and I didn't know anyone in Connecticut, and I just went to a park day. And just in that one park day, it just blew me away about how I learned about the lay of the land. And then I knew who to talk to and how to get started in this. And before I even left the park day, we were in a Shakespeare group and like all these different things, which pretty much set us up for the next 10 years of homeschooling. So yeah, it's really actually quite surprising how easy it is, and how different everybody is in what they're doing, and how even just with one or two families, you find like deep, it's almost like family dating. You find the families that you really connect with, and you make these deep relationships, and your children have this beautiful, consistent friend group year after year, and you watch them grow up, and it's actually very rewarding to have like these other families. The children become like cousins for your kids, and like their mums are like other mothers. And for me, all my family's in Australia, so like it's really great for my children to be surrounded by other mothers and families who've grown up around them. So it's been a very rewarding experience outside.
I really love it. I love everything about it. Again, like you find your group, and you're right. Like my daughter just spent a month in Chicago with friends that she met when she was 2, and that without me, right? All homeschoolers. I don't know. I'm hard pressed. One of the things that I love about homeschooling is there are people from all walks of life, right? And so you get this super culturally diverse experience that I just, in most schools, everyone lives in the same neighborhood, and all of the parents are keeping up with the other parents. And so it's kind of a weird environment where there isn't much diversity, even a thought. I'm not talking about of color, but I'm talking, a thought where this person's mom is Wiccan, and this person's mom is, there's just so many different mixes of people that all can. I love park days because one of the things that happens is we talk about all of these things. And so the kids, even in that experience, get this really cool set of conversations that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? And so do the moms. I've learned so much homeschooling, mostly because of the diversity of experience.
I love the kind of sense of community you're evoking. And, when people talk about helicopter parents, what I hadn't thought of is how school itself somehow, creates this, we've got to have them programmed all day. And, then we hear about disconnection. I get a sense of much richer family and community relationships that you and your children and your families are building out there. And I expect some of it is spontaneity and time and common interest. What do you think? I mean, I expect you would agree that there's richer community than many schooling families have. What
So
leads to
I would say, Michael, that like we're dealing with wholes, like whole families and all the kids in that family, rather than fragmented families. And that's how I see the school system, because you've got everybody at the same age and two friends in the same age group connect, right? But not the siblings or not the parents and not the dads. As opposed to in homeschooling, you're dealing with a whole family, and the relationships are deeper and richer, I think, because of that. And, you know, all my children have a lot of younger sibling friends. Like they're not their siblings, but they're like cousins. And everyone's learning from each other. So I would say it's the wholeness of the whole.
I agree 100%. And it's super funny because of the age differences too. So what happens is, you have a 15-year-old who is engaged in a game of tag with a 5-year-old, and they love it, right? So they all end up taking care of each other. I was also thinking of competition. You know, it's really interesting inside of a homeschooling group, you don't really get that as much, right? And so in school, everyone's the same age, but they're also competing because there's only one top of the class. And even though the parents are all friends, they really want their kid to be the top of the class and not your kid, right? And so, and you know that there's no way to get away from that. And so now remove that from the picture too, because in homeschooling, everybody wants all of the kids to succeed. And here's the really funny thing. It's not succeed at any one thing. It's succeed at life, right? I want them in the end to grow up and be able to do whatever they want, but I don't want them to do it in, like, it's not, I don't want my kid to do it and not your kid, right? We're kind of joined in our goal, and the goal is to get through to adult children who are productive members of society. So the really funny thing is I say that, but most of the homeschoolers I've met, they want way more than that. Productive members of society is not enough, right? But we are at least at the very baseline, starting at, I want them to grow up and be productive members of society.
Well, the community piece is so beautiful. We're running out of time. Kath has a question she asks. Do you want to ask me the Kath question?
Sure. So I always ask the same question, which is like, if like, what's the only thing while you're homeschooling that you wish existed that didn't, that would have been helpful?
So I have two things. My first is somehow for both homeschooled parents and kids to access mental health help, or have people who recognize when there are mental health issues that need to be dealt with. I think that is a huge gap in the community. Everyone, in 98% of the cases, love and hugs is enough, but there are times when it isn't. And being able to pull and get people to help you who also support homeschooling, that's hard. Generally, the person is like, what grade is your kid in? I can't help you unless I know, what grade they're in, what school they go to, that sort of thing. So basically a pool of people who are available to help with non-educational issues, right? That would just be huge. Right? And there was a second thing, and what was it? So talking about park days and community groups, one of the other things that I think would be awesome for most people in homeschooling community is some way to, twice I've had this, almost like community centers. Hey, a place to go when it's raining, or a place to go, right? So that you have a way to, or a place to basically call your place. I think those are the two. I was going to think, I could think of 6 more things, but
Of course, Dee, I hope you know that Kath created this wonderful co-learning, co-working space, which was a fabulous community, just like you're talking about.
Yeah, I talked to Catherine about that, and I think that is such a good idea. Like, I want those everywhere because it would just be huge.
You would have loved it. So I'll ask the Matt Barnes question. He's not here. If there was one thing you could change about the system, what one thing would you change about the education system?
I would include parents. That's weird. But the whole separation of parents and kids, I would get rid of that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Dee. It's great to have a pioneer and someone who knows so much about this world join us. So thank you very much for joining us. And
Super good to be here.
we will be back next week with more When School is Not Working and what to do about it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.